David jolted awake, his breath short and frantic as the dust settled around him. The dim light of an alien sun filtered through the cracked cockpit of his downed ship, illuminating the stark reality. He was the only human on a forsaken, desert-like planet. As he staggered out of the wreckage, his survival suit shielding him from the harsh elements, the vast desolation of red sands stretched endlessly before him. "Systems, report," David croaked, tapping at his wrist communicator. "Warning, critical power levels. Life support, functioning. Communication relay, offline." The AI's voice was calm in contrast to his rising panic. "Great, just great," he muttered, surveying the landscape for any sign of water or shelter. He was truly alone, or so he thought. A soft whirring sound caught his attention. Turning, he saw a figure emerging from behind a distant dune. A figure clearly not human, draped in flowing garments that fluttered in the wind. As the figure approached, David noticed two small creatures trailing behind it, their movements sluggish and pained. They appeared to be pets, or perhaps native wildlife, bonded to their alien master. "Hello," David called out, hoping the figure was friendly. The universal translator embedded in his suit would handle the rest. The alien halted, its large, opalescent eyes studying him with an unreadable expression. It was then David saw she was an alien girl, her demeanor cautious yet curious. "Water?" the alien girl uttered, her voice resonant and melodic. David paused, analyzing her simple request. The creatures at her feet looked up at him with glassy eyes, clearly suffering. I don't have much," David admitted, looking at his own dwindling supply. He held up his flask, its contents meager. The girl stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Please," she implored, her gaze flickering to her companions. Their sides heaved with effort, their condition dire. David looked from the flask to the alien girl and her pets. A part of him screamed to conserve what little he had, but another, deeper part couldn't bear to watch the creatures suffer. With a resigned sigh, he unscrewed the cap and knelt beside the nearest pet, offering it water. "Thank you," the girl said, a warmth entering her previously cold demeanor. She crouched beside him, her hand gently brushing against his as she helped her pets drink. "Are there others like you?" David asked, curiosity overtaking his initial wariness. "No others. Crash. Scattered," she explained briefly, her command of his language imperfect. "And your name?" he ventured, handing her the flask to hold. "Lyra," she replied, giving him a slight nod as she carefully poured water into the parched mouths of her companions. "I'm David," he returned the introduction, watching as the small creatures slowly began to show signs of revival. He marveled at the sight. Such small acts of kindness, he realized, were universal in their significance. "David," Lyra repeated, testing his name on her tongue. "Help me?" Looking around at the desolate landscape, with no sign of civilization and the remnants of his ship the only shelter, he nodded. "We'll need each other to survive," he acknowledged. The pact was unspoken but clear. They were two strangers from different worlds, brought together by circumstance and necessity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand, David knew that his journey on this alien planet had just begun. Together with Lyra, they would face whatever came next. As the first rays of the alien sun crept over the horizon, David and Lyra started their day with the urgency of survivors who knew that every moment was precious. David rummaged through the wreckage of his spacecraft, hoping to find anything that could be useful for their survival. "Here, try this." David handed Lyra a small, solar-powered device. "It's a translator. It should make talking easier." Lyra examined the device with a mixture of curiosity and caution. After a few tentative taps, she clipped it to her ear. "Is this better?" Her words flowed smoother, almost natural. "Much better," David smiled, relieved at not having to guess her meanings anymore. "What are we looking for?" Lyra asked as she joined him in sifting through the debris. "Food, water, tools. Anything that will help us last until rescue," he explained, pulling out a tangled mess of wires and metal sheets. They worked in tandem, speaking little but communicating much through gestures and quick glances. As the sun climbed higher, David uncovered a sealed container. With effort, he pried it open, revealing packets of nutrient-rich rations and a small water filtration unit. "Look at this," he exclaimed, holding up the rations. Lyra's eyes widened. "Food. You have food." "Not much, but it'll help," he nodded, handing her a packet. Watching Lyra take her first cautious bite, David felt a surge of relief. There was something profoundly human about sharing a meal, even with someone from another world. As they ate, David decided to learn more about Lyra's background. "So, how did you end up here? You mentioned a crash?" "Yes," Lyra replied, her face shadowing over. "We were explorers, like you. We wanted to map uncharted systems. But our ship was old, malfunctioned. And your crew?" David pressed gently. "Gone," she said simply, a note of sadness in her voice. "Scattered across the planet, or dead. These two," she gestured at her revived pets, now playfully circling around them, "are all I have left." David listened, his heart heavy. "I'm sorry, Lyra. Maybe we can find them, or at least signal for help." "How?" She looked at him, hope mingling with skepticism. "We can try to repair my ship's distress beacon. If it still works, we could send a signal." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp chirping sound. One of Lyra's pets, a creature with soft, translucent wings, tugged at David's pant leg, pulling him towards a pile of half-buried equipment. "What is it?" David asked, crouching down. "They have good senses." "Maybe it found something," Lyra suggested. Together, they dug through the sand, uncovering a portable solar charger. This could power the beacon, David realized, a plan forming in his mind. For the rest of the day, they worked side by side, repairing and assembling what they could. The task was daunting, but Lyra's quick understanding of technology surprised David. "You're good at this," he commented as she rewired a panel with nimble fingers. Lyra looked up, smiling. "I had to be. Our survival depended on it." As the sun set, casting long shadows over the desert, they tested the beacon. The small red light flickered weakly, then steadied. "It's working," David said, a tired but triumphant grin spreading across his face. Lyra looked at the beacon, then at David. "Thanks to you," she said, her voice warm. "No, thanks to us," he corrected her gently. "We're in this together, right?" "Right," Lyra agreed, her smile reflecting a newfound camaraderie. As they settled down for the night next to the beacon, its light a solitary pinprick in the vast darkness, David felt an unexpected sense of peace. Against all odds, on this remote desert planet, he had found an ally. And maybe, just maybe, a friend. The morning air was still cool as David and Lyra set out to explore the surrounding area. Their goal was to find a sustainable source of water. The desert stretched endlessly, its vast emptiness daunting, but David remained optimistic. "We need to find a water source soon," David said as they trudged up a sandy dune. "The filtration unit won't last forever." Lyra scanned the horizon. "There might be plants or animals that could lead us to water," she suggested, her eyes keenly observing the landscape. "Good idea. Keep an eye out for any signs of life," David replied, adjusting the strap of his backpack. As they walked, their conversation turned to their homes. David described the bustling cities of Earth, its vast oceans, and green forests. Lyra spoke of her planet, Illyria, with its floating gardens and crystal lakes. "It sounds beautiful," David remarked, genuinely intrigued. "It was," Lyra said softly, her voice tinged with homesickness. Mid-morning, one of Lyra's pets, now affectionately named Spark, chirped excitedly and darted towards a cluster of rocks. They followed, finding a damp area where tiny, hardy plants grew. "Looks like you were right about following the wildlife," David chuckled, examining the moist soil. Lyra knelt, touching the wet ground. "There's water here, underground. We need to dig." They worked together, using pieces of wreckage to scoop and dig. After several hours, their efforts were rewarded with a small, trickling spring. "It's not much, but it's something," David said, relief washing over him as he filled a container. "This will help us survive," Lyra added, her face brightening. With their immediate need for water resolved, they returned to their camp, discussing plans to improve their living conditions. The conversation flowed easily now, the bond of shared challenges drawing them closer. Later that evening, as they sat by the campfire, David noticed Lyra looking pensively at the stars. "What's on your mind?" he asked. "I was thinking about your kindness," she said, turning to him. "When you gave your last water to save my pets, it was a generous act." David shrugged, a little embarrassed by her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," Lyra insisted. "It was special." "You are special, David." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of mutual respect and a deepening friendship. "To new friends," David said, raising his water container. "To new beginnings," Lyra echoed, clinking her container against his. They drank, the cool water refreshing after the day's labor. As night deepened, they shared stories of their families and past adventures, the firelight casting dancing shadows on their faces. "Tell me more about Earth," Lyra asked, her curiosity piqued by his earlier descriptions. David obliged, telling her about the mountains that scraped the skies and the deserts not unlike this one, but filled with life and color. He spoke of the oceans, vast and mysterious, teeming with creatures. Lyra listened, enchanted. "I would like to see your ocean someday," she mused. "And I'd like to see your floating gardens," David replied. The promise of sharing their world seemed a distant dream, but in that moment, it felt possible. As they talked late into the night, the stars overhead witnessed the strengthening of a friendship forged by survival and deepened by shared dreams and hopes. Under the pale light of the morning, David and Lyra set about improving their camp. David had sketched some rough plans in the sand, ideas for shelter that could withstand the harsh elements of the desert. "We'll need more materials," David stated, looking over the debris scattered around the crash site. "Maybe parts of the hull could be used for the framework." Lyra nodded, her eyes following his gestures. "I saw some panels over that ridge," she said, pointing towards a distant pile of wreckage. "They might be useful." Together, they ventured to the indicated spot, gathering large, flat sheets of metal along with other useful bits of technology. The physical labor was demanding under the scorching sun, but the necessity of their task fueled their determination. As they worked, Lyra seemed thoughtful. "David, how did you learn to build things?" she asked, her tone curious. "My father was an engineer," David explained as he examined a panel to gauge its suitability. "He used to take me to his projects, showed me how to use tools, make things work." "What about you? You seem to handle tech pretty well." Lyra's face lit up with the memory. "My mother was a scientist on Illyria. She taught me a lot about machines and gadgets." "It's funny, the things you remember when you're far from home." "Yeah," David agreed, smiling. "It's the small memories that stick." Their conversation helped the hours pass quickly as they hauled their findings back to camp. With teamwork, they began constructing a more robust shelter, using the panels as walls and some of the sturdier wreckage for support. "Like this?" Lyra asked, holding a beam while David secured it. "Exactly like that," David confirmed, tightening the connections. "You're a quick learner." Lyra beamed at the compliment. "You're a good teacher." As the structure took shape, David marveled at how well they worked together. Despite coming from different worlds, their skills complemented each other, making the daunting task not only bearable but enjoyable. Later, as they took a break in the shade of their new shelter, David pulled out a small device. "I found this in the cockpit," he said. "It's a map maker. We could use it to explore further without getting lost." "Can it show us where water might be?" Lyra inquired, peering over his shoulder at the device. "Possibly," David replied, activating the device. A holographic map of the surrounding area flickered to life. "It scans topography. Could help us find more springs or maybe even a river." Fascinated, Lyra watched as David manipulated the controls, expanding the map's scope. "There," she pointed to a blue line several kilometers away. "Is that water?" "Looks like it," David said, his voice tinged with excitement. "We should check it out tomorrow." "Yes, let's," Lyra agreed, her enthusiasm matching his. That evening, as they sat outside their new shelter, Lyra looked at David with a serious expression. "David, I've been thinking. You've done so much for me, for us. I haven't thanked you properly. David waved her off. No need for thanks, Lyra. We're helping each other. But I want you to know, she continued, how grateful I am. Not just for the water or the shelter, but for your company. David was touched by her words. I feel the same, Lyra. It's been better than I could have hoped, given the circumstances. Their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. Here, on this alien planet, they had found an unexpected friendship. It was a bond formed not just of need, but of genuine respect and affection. As the stars emerged, twinkling in the unfamiliar sky, they turned their gaze upwards. Beautiful, Lyra whispered. Very beautiful, David agreed, not just referring to the sky. In the peaceful silence that followed, both felt the deepening of their trust, a foundation stronger than any shelter they could build. They were no longer just survivors but partners in this strange new world. The desert morning was cool and crisp as David and Lyra set out to investigate the potential water source they had spotted on the mapmaker. Their newly built shelter stood sturdy and reliable against the horizon, a testament to their teamwork and shared efforts. Ready to see if we found a real river? David asked, adjusting his pack on his shoulders. Lyra nodded, her eyes shining with anticipation. I haven't seen running water since we crashed. I'm more than ready. Their journey took them across the rugged terrain, the map maker guiding their path through the undulating dunes. They spoke little, conserving energy, but their comfortable silence was a sign of their growing bond. After several hours of trekking, the sound of running water finally greeted them. The sight of a small river, clear and sparkling under the alien sun, was more beautiful than they had imagined. It's real, Lyra breathed out, her voice a mix of relief and joy. We found it, David grinned, joining her by the riverbank. They both knelt to touch the water, marveling at its coolness. This will change everything, David said. We can set up a proper camp here, maybe even grow some food if we can find seeds or spores. Lyra scooped up a handful of water, letting it run between her fingers. We should celebrate, she suggested. How do you celebrate on Illyria? David asked, curious. With music and dancing under the stars, she explained with a wistful smile. But since we can't have that, maybe just sharing stories tonight by the river? I'd like that, David agreed. They spent the rest of the day planning the move of their camp to the riverside, marking a safe path back on the mapmaker. As dusk fell, they settled by the newly discovered river, the sound of water a soothing backdrop. Lyra began, recounting tales of her youth on Illyria, her family, and the colorful festivals they celebrated. David listened intently, transported by her words to a world so different, yet so vividly painted by her memories. He shared his own stories in return, of Earth's vast oceans, the cities bustling with life, and his own dreams of exploring the stars. It's funny, David mused as their stories drew to a close, how similar our dreams are, despite coming from such different places. Lyra nodded, her gaze reflective. Maybe that's why the universe brought us together, to see the common dreams in each other. Their conversation drifted to more personal reflections, their fears and hopes, the uncertainty of rescue, and what they might do if no help came. In sharing their vulnerabilities, their connection deepened, grounded in mutual understanding and empathy. It's not so bad, being stuck here, not when I have you as my friend, Lyra said sincerely, her hand resting briefly on his. David felt a warmth spread through him, a comfort he hadn't realized he'd been missing. I agree. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together, he replied, his voice steady and sure. The night grew deeper, and they continued to talk, the barrier of being from different worlds melting away under the shared stars. It was a perfect night, where the cool breeze, the sound of the river, and their intertwined stories wove a tapestry of a newfound intimacy. Finally, as the moons of the alien planet climbed high into the night sky, they fell into a contented silence, watching the stars and feeling the peace of their shared presence. They had found not just survival on this strange new world, but something profoundly human, friendship and a sense of belonging. As they returned to their camp, the light from the stars guided their way, a natural beacon in the dark, promising more days of companionship and exploration together. The morning after their riverside conversation, David and Lyra began the task of moving their camp closer to the water. With renewed energy, they discussed the layout of their new site, focusing on the practicalities of daily survival now that water was plentiful. "We'll need a way to store water," David noted, marking a spot on the sandy bank. "And maybe a small garden," Lyra added, her eyes scanning the area for fertile soil. "If we find seeds, we could start growing food." "Right, let's get to work then," David said, handing Lyra some salvaged tools. They spent the day in concerted effort, setting up water containment systems using salvaged materials from the wreckage. As they worked, they chatted about techniques and methods, each learning from the other's background in makeshift engineering and botany. Later, as they took a break under the newly erected shade structure, Lyra turned to David with a curious expression. "David, back on Earth, what did you miss the most when you were out on missions?" David thought for a moment, the memories of home bringing a soft smile to his face. "The ocean, mostly. The way it smells, the sound of the waves. It's calming. What about you? What do you miss about Illyria?" "The gardens," she replied without hesitation. "They float above the city, drifting gently. They were peaceful, full of colors and scents." Their conversation drifted naturally from homesickness to dreams, where they saw themselves if they ever got off this planet. David expressed a desire to return to exploration, perhaps with a safer, more reliable ship. Lyra laughed at that, agreeing that a more dependable ship would be good. "I'd like to see Earth," Lyra mused, her voice tinged with longing. "And I'd show you Illyria. I think you'd like the tranquility of our gardens." "I'm sure I would," David agreed warmly. "It's a deal then. One day, we'll visit each other's worlds." Their plans might have been wishful thinking, but speaking them aloud gave them a sense of possibility. They spent the afternoon testing the water system and were pleased to find it working beyond their expectations. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, David and Lyra prepared a small meal with their ration supplies, now supplemented by a few edible plants Lyra had identified near the river. Sitting by the river, eating together, David felt a sense of domesticity that he hadn't expected to find on this alien world. "You know, this isn't how I pictured my first deep space mission going," he chuckled, passing Lyra a makeshift plate. "Nor I," Lyra chuckled back. "I imagined less crashing and more discovering. Still, we're discovering a lot. About survival, about each other," David pointed out, his tone reflective. "Yes, we are," Lyra agreed, her gaze meeting his. In that look, there was a recognition of their shared experiences, the hardships they had overcome, and the bond they had formed. As the evening wore on, they discussed building a signal device, hoping to catch the attention of passing ships. Their technical conversation was interspersed with laughter and shared jokes, a lightness that had become a staple of their interactions. "Tomorrow, we start building the signal," David declared as they doused the fire. "Together," Lyra added, her voice firm with determination. "Yes, together," David echoed, and they retreated to their shelter, the stars overhead a silent witness to their resilience and camaraderie. The night was peaceful, filled with the sounds of the nearby river and the gentle rustling of the alien foliage. In those quiet hours, David and Lyra found comfort in their companionship, each grateful for the other's presence in a world far from home. With the river providing a lifeline and their camp now fully operational, David and Lyra turned their attention to constructing a signal device. The early morning was cool and quiet as they reviewed the plans David had drawn in the dirt outside their shelter. "Okay, so the main thing we need is to boost the signal strength enough to break through the planet's atmosphere," David explained, pointing to the schematic. "This old communications array from the ship might just do the trick." Lyra, who had become quite adept at understanding technical diagrams, nodded. "And these solar panels will power it?" "Exactly," David confirmed. "If we angle them correctly, they should gather enough sunlight to keep the signal running continuously." The pair spent the morning scavenging the necessary components from the wreckage. They found most of what they needed, though some parts required modification to fit their makeshift design. As they worked, Lyra handled the tools with increasing confidence, something David didn't fail to notice. "You've got a real knack for this," He complimented her as she successfully rewired a solar panel. Lyra smiled, pleased. I had a good teacher, she said, gesturing to him. With the components gathered, the afternoon was spent assembling the device. It was intricate work, demanding precision and patience. They took turns soldering connections and securing parts, their teamwork seamless after days of shared labor. By evening, the device stood complete on a makeshift platform overlooking the river. It should work, David said, though a trace of uncertainty lingered in his voice. Ready to test it? Lyra's face was determined as she nodded. Let's see if our efforts pay off. David flipped the switch they had rigged up. There was a moment of silence. Then a low hum filled the air as the device powered up. They watched the signal indicator start to blink, a steady, rhythmic pulse. It's working, David exclaimed, relief and joy mixing in his voice. Lyra laughed, her relief palpable. We did it. Now we just need someone to hear it. They sat next to the device, watching the stars begin to pepper the night sky. If you could send a message back home, what would you say? David asked, turning to her. Lyra thought for a moment. I'd tell them I'm safe, not to worry, and that I've met an extraordinary friend. Her gaze met his, sincere and warm. David felt a flush of warmth at her words. I'd say pretty much the same, he admitted. The conversation turned to what they would do once they were rescued. David spoke of returning to Earth, but mentioned that he would think of this planet, not just as a place of hardship, but also as a place where he found a true friend. And I would invite you to Illyria, Lyra said, to see the gardens you helped me remember when everything seemed dark. I'd like that, David replied, the idea of visiting her world feeling more like a promise than a simple possibility. Their talk drifted into plans and dreams until the late hours of the night. Exhausted but content, they finally decided to get some rest, taking turns monitoring the signal device. As Lyra took the first watch, she looked up at the stars, thinking about the vast distances their signal had to travel. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that no matter what happened, they had achieved something remarkable together. The night was quiet, the only sound the gentle lapping of the river and the soft hum of their beacon reaching out to the stars. As dawn broke over the horizon, David and Lyra were up and about, their spirits buoyed by the functioning signal device. They spent the morning performing maintenance on their camp and ensuring the signal's continuous operation, all the while keeping an ear out for any response. It's been quiet, David observed, checking the device's output levels. But everything seems to be working perfectly. Lyra, who had been scanning the skies with a pair of salvaged binoculars, nodded. It's just a matter of time, she replied, her voice carrying an unwavering optimism. Their routine continued for several days, monitoring the signal, improving the camp, and exploring the surrounding area. Each night, they shared stories and plans for the future, their friendship deepening in the shared solitude of the alien planet. Then, on a quiet afternoon, as David was adjusting the solar panels, Lyra's shout broke the calm. David, look! She was pointing excitedly towards the sky. Squinting against the sunlight, David saw it. A small speck growing larger, a ship descending towards their planet. The signal had worked. They were being rescued. Can you believe it? David laughed, relief and joy overwhelming him as he watched the ship approach. I knew it, Lyra beamed, her eyes alight with tears of joy. I just knew it. As the ship landed, a team of rescuers disembarked, quickly making their way towards them. David and Lyra were checked by medics and given food and water from the ship. They answered questions about their survival, the rescuers amazed at their resourcefulness. We wouldn't have made it without each other, David told the captain of the rescue ship. Lyra's knowledge of the local environment and her quick learning saved us as much as any of my training did. The captain nodded, impressed. You'll both be commended for your bravery and ingenuity. You're a testament to interstellar cooperation. As the reality of leaving the planet sank in, David turned to Lyra. So, this is it, huh? We're going home. Lyra looked around at the camp that had been their home, her expression bittersweet. Yes, we're going home. But remember our promise? Visiting each other's worlds? David smiled. I haven't forgotten, and I intend to keep it. Me too, Lyra agreed. I owe you a tour of Illyria's gardens, and I expect to see Earth's oceans." Their goodbyes were heartfelt. The crew prepared for takeoff, and David and Lyra found a moment to stand looking at the camp one last time. "You know, I think I'm going to miss this place," David said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Me too," Lyra replied. "It wasn't easy, but it was important. It changed me." "It changed me too," David said. "But what I'm really going to miss is this. Us, working together, surviving together." Lyra nodded, her hand reaching out to squeeze his. "We'll always have this, no matter where we go next." As they boarded the ship, David looked back at the planet, a chapter of his life closing behind him. But ahead lay new adventures, new worlds to explore, and the promise of friendship that would last across the stars. The engines roared to life, and as the ship ascended, David and Lyra watched the planet shrink beneath them, their shared experiences a bond that would endure the vast distances of space.